All right, so everyone's talking about how challenging the upcoming couple of years are going to be from a budget perspective. And that means you need to take control of how dollars flow out of your organization. So, how do you do that? Well, it starts with the data, and specifically data on how, where, when, and with what frequency purchases are being made all across your various departments. You may or may not have a procure to pay platform that makes it easy to measure this type of activity. But to get you inspired, you should go check out Procurify's brand new Charter School Benchmark Report. It just came out a couple weeks ago and offers 10 procurement benchmarks from charter schools across the country, highlighting things like average PO volumes, spend per vendor, items per vendor, how long it takes to go from requisition to PO, and so on. Not only will you be intrigued to answer these same questions for your school, it might also shine a light on opportunities for cost control next year. You can go to procurify.com/resources to download a copy or check out the episode description, and we've linked to it there as well. All right, now back to the show.
It's really the finance committee is vetting things before it gets to the full board. And if that step does not happen, then instead of taking 5 or 10 minutes at each board meeting to go through the finances, it can become who knows amount of time. It could be 30 minutes, could be an hour.
Welcome to Charter School Insider, lessons from the nation's top charter school operators, the only podcast dedicated to the behind-the-scenes business of running a successful charter school. Join us as we sit down with charter school leaders who share how they are overcoming the biggest operational hurdles facing their schools today.
All right, everyone, my guest today is Raj Thakkar. Raj is the founder and chief executive officer of Charter School Business Management, as well as Foresight Financial Services for Good. Raj is widely regarded as an expert on nonprofit and charter school finance. He presents at conferences all across the country, and he recently published his first book, Fiscally Secure: Prepare, Protect, and Propel Your Charter School with Responsible Financial Management. That's what we're going to be talking about today. We dive into some of the key concepts in the book, how the book is structured, and what you can expect if you are a leader at a charter school, work in finance, or have an interest in education. There's lots more to Raj's personal and professional bio. Just to name a couple of highlights, CSBM and Foresight, his two companies, have been named Small Business of the Year for the Eastern region of the United States by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce multiple times. Raj is also a graduate of Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program, and Raj has taught Understanding Social Enterprise, How to Use Business as a Force for Good as an adjunct professor at New York University's Wagner School of Public Service. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Well, Raj, thanks so much for being here today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And for those who don't know you or who aren't familiar with charter school business management, I wanted to start with a quick background on yourself personally and professionally, because we're going to be talking about the new book that you recently published. But I think it would be helpful for listeners who don't know you just to have a sense for the work that you've been doing with charter schools for almost 20 years now. So do you mind kicking us off with a quick background on CSBM and why you originally founded the organization?
Sure. So almost 18 years ago, I founded Charter School Business Management after having been the chief financial officer of Explore Charter School in Brooklyn, New York. And I kept encountering so many different school leaders who were very passionate about the academic programs that they wanted to implement, but they were either not interested or intimidated by the financial side of things. And after building up a reputation, I said, hey, I'd love to help with this, especially because financial mismanagement's the number one reason why charter schools are shut down. So I said, let me take a shot, and it's been exciting to see what's unfolded over time.
So you were a charter school CFO. You've now been doing this work for 18 years, helping other schools navigate the choppy waters of finance. As you mentioned, many people may be passionate about the academics, but a little timid on the finance and operations side of things. Why publish this book? Why now? Was this something that you've thought about doing all along since the beginning of CSBM, or what was kind of the impetus or the catalyst for publishing the work now?
Sure. So when I first launched CSBM, it was intended to be professional development for finance and operations people only. And what ended up happening was I helped 10 of the 12 schools that were opening in New York City in fall of 2006. And a lot of them, after we got done working together, they said, you obviously know what you're doing. Why can't we outsource this work to you? So that gave birth to our approach of we can do the work for you. We can teach you how and why. It can be a combination of the two. So this has been on my list of to-dos for a very long time. And the pandemic essentially was like, okay, once we knew we were going to survive the pandemic, because it was hectic for all of us in that critical time period, I said, this is the time to do it. We're all apart. Let me really focus and get this done once and for all.
Well, I'm personally learning quite a bit as I myself read through it, and the book is organized in a unique format, and it seems like it's kind of designed so that someone could jump to a specific chapter if they're having a particular challenge at their school, and you've organized it in these two-part equations of causes and cures, so sort of fundamental financial challenges, and then you propose cures or solutions to those challenges, and it's really, really practical. And within each of those cures, there's 10 of them in the book, and then you get into the underlying symptoms as well. I was curious why that format, as you thought about building sort of a one-stop shop manual for charter school finance. How did you land on that particular format?
So a couple of different things. One is we found over the years that there's a lot of school leaders, board members, leaders of charter school networks that may not take this work seriously enough. And it's always this uphill battle where financial management is only taken seriously after some major fraud has occurred. They've gotten in trouble with their authorizer. They've gotten in trouble with their auditor. So back in the day when I would present to with BES and other, the New York City Charter School Center or anywhere else around the country that we've spoken, what seemed to resonate a lot was with people when I said, I used to call it, this was the mistake and this was the solution. And I thought going all in with medical references may resonate with readers and listeners even better. And it was also somewhat inspired by Brene Brown, where she's a shame researcher. If you've ever listened to any of her books or read her books, and she said, "Look, I can go right into the solutions, but if I do that, then you're not going to really value what causes these things." So I said, I want to share both the causes and the cures, and then go a layer deeper with the symptoms and the remedies. And I want readers and listeners to just say, where in the spectrum in between do we land? Are we closer to the cause? Are we closer to the cure? And how do we get closer to the ideal and further away from the non-ideal? So that just seemed to resonate for me and with people who've attended past workshops. So I said, why not just keep following what's working?
Love it. All right. So what we're going to do is a bit of a primer for the book today. So what I was hoping to accomplish was we could explore 3 of the 10 cures together, just take a brief dive into each of them. And then obviously if listeners are fascinated, we'd encourage you to go check out the book. So if it's cool with you, I'd love to talk through a couple of these and have you riff on them. And hopefully it gives a good look into what listeners can expect from the book. Does that work?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Perfect. So let's start with Cure 6, and I'll read this out here, and I'm also going to read some of the underlying symptoms because I think it's helpful for the listeners. So Cure number 6, prepare and analyze vital financial reports, forecasts, and metrics. Assess your fiscal health to make informed decisions. So that's the cure, and some of the underlying symptoms that you call out are, I'll just read these off in order, not forecasting at all in financial reports, double dipping or misusing restricted funds, flawed financial reporting and forecasts, not figuring out which metrics to track, and then lastly, not establishing and maintaining a fiscal calendar. So I listed the main cure here and some of the underlying symptoms. But I'm curious to ask you, what's kind of the fundamental cause here that you're seeing with schools? Why do these things happen?
Yeah, there's too many schools who are backwards looking only, where they do budget versus actuals. And that's nice, right? Where like, okay, this is what we thought was going to happen versus what actually happened, backwards looking. But the real part of this is, what does that mean for the end of the fiscal year? Because are we on track? Are we going to be Are we headed towards a surplus? Are we headed towards a deficit? And backwards looking only doesn't give you any helpful information about whether you can hire those extra staff members that you need to help the students, to help, reduce the workload on the staff. Um, and, to me, it's an incomplete financial story. So you need to forecast through end of the fiscal year to make informed decisions. And instead of the whole fingers crossed approach, like, oh, I hope this works, where too many school leaders do that, they can, with some level of certainty, say, okay, yes, we can afford that. We're headed for a $500,000 surplus. Let's hire those, one math specialist and reading specialist that can, push into classrooms and help, or whatever else the school needs. It gets more detailed from there, but that's the real cause, is it can't be backwards looking only.
So why do you think that happens? You mentioned that the typical report people are pulling is just budget versus actuals. Why is that the fallback, or maybe the easy go-to? What are maybe some of the underlying contributors on a finance team for not doing this more advanced reporting?
So sometimes there are different types of accounting and finance people where if they're too precise and they're very accountant heavy, in their mindset, they kind of dismiss the value of forecasting because they're like, well, it's not exact. So the resistance may come from the staff member themselves and saying, well, it's not perfect, right? Because a lot of accountants like everything to be, tying to the penny. And then they may or may not have the skills to forecast. And forecasting, in our view, especially with a charter school, if you have informed assumptions, then you can come up with a pretty decent forecast. So, for example, if you have stability at your school and enrollment, is going to dip down 5%, 10%, you can factor that in. And nowadays, enrollment is one of the biggest drivers, and it's more than ever given all the moving around that families have done during the pandemic. So the non-exact nature of forecasting can upset some people. And sometimes it's just, they don't have the time because the back office team should be, double or 1.5 times the size that it is. So they're overwhelmed and something's got to give. And if the school leader is not aware that forecasting should be happening, they won't hold them accountable to that level. And they'll say, well, I'll get the budget versus actuals out, and then I've got to get payroll done. I've got to get this report done. And they're just juggling too many things.
Right. So it could be a combination of in-house expertise, kind of personal perspective on the validity of forecasting on the team. And as you mentioned, forecasting can be a little bit of art and a little bit of science. Are there at times misaligned incentives for finance teams when it comes to reporting? Are there any cautionary tales as you think about forecasting?
There may be some finance folks who want to always be in the business of good news and avoid the bad news. I think it's usually they may just not think that it's possible. So like, for example, if the school leader knows that they're going to be firing a particular position or positions, you can forecast that out and say, which month are you planning on downsizing a bit, or are they going to quit because they're burned out? And then you can extrapolate forward. Okay, are you going to replace that position? Are you going to have a consultant come in? There's different decisions that can be made. Or, we don't have enough marketing budget for this particular effort. Just zero that out and forecast that out. So it could be the skill set. It could be the time. There's just so many different factors, but it varies from school to school.
You talk a lot about grant funding in this chapter of the book, and we actually did a whole episode on grant management last week on the podcast with Kim Taryn, and she kind of talked about a framework for grant management, a lot of similarities to what you lay out here in the book. When it comes to grant funding in particular, how does that play into forecasting, and how can schools most easily avoid that symptom of double dipping or accessing restricted funds that they shouldn't be accessing?
So a lot of the dollars that charter schools receive have strings attached. And those strings can be in terms of time, that it has to be used between this date and that date, or it can be for certain purposes. It can be used towards computers, but not towards staff, or vice versa. Um, and when a school is not on top of tracking these things live as they happen in their accounting system, because if you track it through Excel, there's so many things that can go wrong. But when you do it through your accounting system, then you're forced not to attach that same expense to two different funding sources, because you just physically can't. Um, and there's a lot of shuffle game that goes on within the charter school world, where you applied for a certain grant, you got it, and then months later you get another one for the same purpose, because you didn't know that you were going to be awarded both of them. So one or both of those grants may allow for amendments, and then you have to apply for the amendment, see if it gets approved, and then you're constantly moving things around and saying, okay, let's let fund ABC pay for this instead of fund XYZ, because they allowed them the amendment and the other one didn't. So um, that can get very tricky. And when it becomes hundreds of thousands of dollars, especially like with all the ESSER funding that's been allocated, you have to stay on top of it. And if you assume that you're spending towards those purposes, you may end up finding that what you spent on didn't qualify per the terms. And then now you get to spend more of your general education funding, and it can really spiral down. And so you have to stay on top of this all.
You make the observation that in the midst of this forecasting process, it often is true at schools that not all of the key stakeholders that have an invested interest in the budget actually speak the language of finance. Particularly when you think about the academic side of the house, maybe there's a chief academic officer who was a teacher, and then a teacher coach, and then a principal, and now leads the academic function, but doesn't feel like they were ever trained formally when it comes to financial modeling or something like that. I would, for me personally, I never went to business school or anything like that. It might be intimidating that someone else, my CFO, built this cool financial model. I should just assume that things are correct here and I can trust the work. But you kind of take a different approach and say horizontally across the organization, there needs to be a critical environment where assumptions are challenged and different perspectives are taken into account when doing the forecasting process. How does a school help promote that type of an environment?
A lot of it is transparency and disclosing transparently what assumptions you're using. So you can state in a notes column on that financial report, my assumption is that, our budget is built on 200 students. The assumption is we're going to end the year at 180 students because we're going to be 10% down. And then the school leader can challenge that and say, no, I would prefer that you do this based on 190 students because our enrollment team just recruited another 10 students. So there's that back and forth, and there's that need to iterate. But the school leader can only do that if there's transparency around where you got those numbers from. So there has to be a huge amount of trust between the school leader and the finance leader, because if the school leader is holding too many things close to the chest of I'm going to lay off all the teaching assistants because we just simply can't afford it any longer, they need to disclose that to the finance team. And you can say, keep that to yourself because that's going to have some ripple effect. Maybe an extreme example, right? But there has to be that discussion, because then, similar to when you're creating the budget, there has to be this iterative process. So we like to see these numbers first being vetted by the school leader. Then the school leader blesses these numbers and then says, okay, let's move it to the finance committee. The finance committee beats it up the report and challenges the assumptions. And then finally it gets to the full board, so that the numbers have been challenged twice before it gets to the full board, instead of, a hectic board meeting where people are seeing numbers for the first time, being shocked and all this type of stuff. It's like, no, this has been twice vetted already.
It was really interesting to me how so often the solution that you lay out to some of these underlying symptoms when it comes to reporting and forecasting has to do with clear and regular communication vertically within the finance team, but also horizontally with the rest of the executive team and the board, and really taking a systematic approach to that where people know when they can expect certain financial reports. If a school is listening to this, maybe someone on the finance team is thinking, wow, we don't have a system at all. We don't have a calendar like Raj was talking about for clear and regular reporting. What's the starting place? Like where do you all at CSBM, if you contract with a new client, where do you all think about the starting line for setting this up at an organization?
Yeah. So first, we need to know that we can rely on the accounting, that exists, because if you're forecasting based on wrong numbers, then the forecasts are going to be wrong as well. So we first make sure that the accounting is straight, because if they're not doing things on an accrual basis and it's a combination of sometimes accrual, sometimes cash basis, that's a problem. So we like to test out some of the transactions and see if there's any errors that are underlying. Then we kind of educate the school on how to do a forecast, and we start with the revenues and say, look, since you did this budget, what new information has come in? How has enrollment had some sort of variance? Which of the grant applications that you've submitted have been awarded, yet they're still outstanding? Can you assign a percentage of probability that you believe you'll get some of these grants? Or so, for example, it's like, oh yeah, we submitted the Title I application. That's 100% that we're going to get it. It's just a matter of time until until they've signed off on it. Versus, this is a brand new foundation. We've never gotten this before. Let's give it a 25% chance. So you can extrapolate out. If you've applied for $100,000, you give it a 25% chance. You can say, all right, let's count on maybe 25,000 of that 100,000. There's different ways. And then same thing on the expense side. We can say, okay, is your staff happy, and is there stability at the staff level? Is this a revolving door at this school because people are constantly quitting? They're upset with how management is handling everything? How a lot of the purchasing happens in the first quarter of the year because, new computers, new textbooks, new workbooks, all of that stuff. So are you going to stay on budget? Did you underestimate? And really educate them on how to do this and get them to buy in that this is even possible. If they're just like, this is just useless Excel mumbo jumbo, then they're not going to, if they're not bought in, then forget it. It's a waste of time. But when you show them that it's possible, and then we have an example that we always have, and we show them the numbers to look for and say, see this in this example, it looks like there's a surplus of, $250,000, which is less than the $400,000 that your budget predicted, but it's still good news. You're still $250,000 ahead of the game. So and when we educate them, then they typically buy in and say, wow, I can make decisions based on these assumptions and forecasts, instead of, I know my students need this, I know my staff needs this.
All right, so I want to move us to our next cure, and this is cure number 8 in the book, and it's grow wisely. Know whether, when, and how to scale. And the reverse of this is basically sabotaging your school's impact by trying to grow too quickly, trying to replicate irresponsibly, and not thinking about some of the implications or consequences. And just a couple of the symptoms, I won't read them all here, but underestimating the actual startup period, underestimating what expansion and replication actually takes, thinking about all the work that goes into the summertime, year-end reporting, not thinking about your renewal. There's a whole kind of laundry list of underlying symptoms here. And I want to start with kind of the obvious question, which is, why is growth so enticing, and why do schools jump at this at times, maybe too quickly, or when they're unprepared to tackle the work that growth actually entails?
So there's a few different things. One is, once their initial program has demonstrated that it works, it's like, oh, wow. And they see this giant waiting list, then they want to impact more students. It's very well intended, and quite honestly, there's also a lot of funding available for growth, right? Charter School Growth Fund, New School Venture Fund, all these different foundations. There's a lot of funding for it. So there's CSP money for from the federal government. There's a lot of dollars there, and everyone wants to feel important. Everyone wants to impact people. Education is how former third world countries have gotten ahead in the world, and it's very well intended. However, we're always asking, are you ready? Is your staff ready? What if the second school isn't exactly the same as the first school? Which components of the second school are non-negotiable versus negotiable? Because every leader wants to put their own kind of mark on a school, and they may not be 100% bought in. So just being clear about the negotiables and the non-negotiables. But yeah, I'll stop there. Growth is alluring,
Yeah, I think you definitely hit the nail on the head with well-intended passion being the driver here. I think most people, as you alluded to, see the impact they're having in one location and think, oh my gosh, there's so many more students and families that we could be impacting with our program. My thought would be that there's a whole host of charter school founders who maybe got through their first 5 years and think to themselves, oh, if I could only go back, I would set things up this way from the beginning. I have all these learnings from my experiences founding this school, or maybe CMOs who have 25 campuses and think, how hard could it be to add another one in this new city or this new location? But as you talk about in the book, that's not always the case, and schools need to be thinking about the preconditions, particularly financially, for setting up sustainable growth. So how would you lay those out? Like, what are the foundational preconditions before a school should really think about replicating?
So if you have an aligned staff, right, because it's going to be the people who handle all the growth. So alignment around all the systems, all the routines, arrival, dismissal, breakfast, lunch, snack, like those routines. If there's problems in those, then there's most likely problems with the academic side of things. With the financial side of things, can you afford it? We like to see if there's a resident principal who's observing and operating in the flagship school, so that they can take over the replication later. Are there staff that's going to be displaced from one site to the next? Is there funding available? Are the authorizers aligned on your growth? Is it just a separate campus, or do you have to apply for another apply for another charter? So those rules are required. Have you developed a separate charter management organization? Are you going to do shared services where you divvy it up based on the head count of students? And then you say, well, the flagship has 500 kids. The replication initially has 100 kids. So let's do a 5-to-1 split for all the expenses. You have to think through all these different things. So it's almost similar to dating versus living together, getting engaged and getting married. Like you have to be ready for all those phases. You can't just jump in and say, we met yesterday, we're getting married tomorrow. Like, no, you can't do that.
One of the warnings I guess you give is actually for schools who have a really successful first year. You talk about oftentimes schools that come off of an incredible year one are not thinking about the workload that comes in the summer, operationally, financially, not really thinking about preparing for their renewal. And I would imagine for schools like that, if they start to open a second campus immediately or jump straight to growth, there may be instances where that original campus, the founding campus, starts to falter operationally, financially, or otherwise. Are there any trends that you see in terms of that? Schools starting out kind of hot out of the gate and then challenging running into challenging circumstances because of growth. Do you have any thoughts on that type of a scenario?
So what comes to mind with that is, I believe Credo did some studies on this, and schools that start strong tend to stay strong, and schools that out of the gate, were not as strong as they could have been, they tend to stay that way. It's really just like your GPA in your first semester of college. If you goofed off and you start out with a C, it's very hard to climb that to a B and eventually an A. And if you started out with a 4.0, you're like, okay, well, let's keep this going. So a lot of it depends on how much effort and who you've surrounded yourself with, not only on the staff level, but on the board. If you're a school leader who's surrounded yourself with a bunch of your friends, they're not going to hold you accountable like folks who are really true professionals and have prior experience in the charter school space. So it's really the people that are the defining factor. Have you chosen to outsource certain matters like IT and finance? However you handle it, as long as you have great people doing the work, and they're able to communicate what's happening. They're keeping each other in the loop. It's like there's that first summer right after you finish your first year. From that to year 2 is probably the most critical test, because the summertime is where all the chaos happens. The audit has got to get done. There may be an annual report you have to submit to your authorizer. The Title I application is due. There's people who are being hired. There's people who have left or been fired, who have to be offered COBRA for their health insurance and dental insurance. There's a lot of moving pieces. Then there's stripping and waxing of floors and moving furniture around. And there's so much chaos that can go on in the summertime. And if you don't have enough bodies doing this work, then something's going to suffer. And then that will set the stage for what year 2 looks like. So, and that may be the largest percentage growth. If you go from 150 kids to 250 or 300 kids by year 2, like that's a huge percentage. You're growing 100% or close to it. So it's very telling how people survive year 2. And I would say, try to get through one charter cycle, get your charter renewed, and then think about replicating, because your authorizer, unless you have a rock star team, your authorizer may or may not be behind you launching a second campus or applying for a second school. So the stars do have to align to make this work.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. All right, so I want to move us to our third and final cure that we're going to look at today. And this is cure number 10, the last cure. It reads, value your invaluable talent and technology, amplify impact, and reduce turnover. So I'm actually going to read a quick excerpt from the book because I think this is helpful in framing this last cure. It reads, schools need to create systems and expectations that specify for each stakeholder what is due, why it is needed, who is doing it, when it is due, where to submit it, and how it will be done. And I think this is a good primer because in this chapter you talk a lot about two things. The first is trust, and the second is systems. And trust is talked a lot about more broadly in business. I think Stephen Covey probably is the most famously quoted, business moves at the speed of trust. But in the context of charter schools and within that, in the context of building a financially stable organization, why do you think trust is such a critical component of a successful school? Why do you, go so deep on this in this particular cure, chapter 10?
So when there's a lack of trust, there tends to be a tendency for micromanaging. And I still haven't found anybody who's told someone in the workplace, I love being micromanaged. No, no one likes that, right? So our view is you say, this is what I'm going to get done. If I remember having check-ins with the school leader at Explore, and we would talk about between now and our next check-in, whether that was a weekly or bi-weekly, I forget, this is what's going to get done. And whenever there was, I would say, out of these 10 these 4 got done, these 6 did not. I plan to get those done by the next time. But then here's all the things that got in the way. The copier broke down, the internet went down, the security guard kept tripping the heating system because he's putting five heating fans on himself, and whatever, all the craziness that can go on in a school. There was a squirrel running around, and I had to get that squirrel out. That wasn't on my list. So there has to be all these different. The communication has to happen, because otherwise the school leader could just as easily say, well, you didn't do 6 of the 10. You're not good at your job. And it's just like, well, wait a second. There's always these things that you didn't plan on that ended up needing attention. So that communication is just so ultra important. And because then if the trust is there, that person is going to honor their word or describe what got in the way. And you have to the leader has to be able to distinguish, are these just a bunch of excuses, or are they legit? And I need to actually hire another person. So I remember when I was the sole person on the finance side, he was like, what is getting in the way? I said, well, all the purchasing. I purchased all the items that teachers said they needed, but they got the wrong color or they got the wrong size. They told me the wrong item number to order. All of those different things really can add up, because now you have to return all those things and then order the new one and then ship it overnight. And now that incurs more expensive costs. So the ability to communicate all the things that got done, didn't get done, and why they didn't get done will build that trust. And it's just, that can allow things to operate a lot more smoothly.
So we've been talking about the importance of trust broadly at the organization, but I wanted to ask you about this from this chapter. What's the role of the board finance committee? And specifically, what should it be? What shouldn't it be? How should that relationship look like between the board finance chair or committee and the frontline finance team that's actually in the weeds doing the day-to-day financial operations? Maybe unpack that for us a little bit.
Yeah, so in some cases, the board finance committee is guiding the finance leader on what types of reports they want to see, and it should not be a moving target, right? So there should be alignment on, these are the components of the reports that we'd like to see every month or every quarter, whatever frequency that you lay out. Because if it's a moving target, then that becomes very difficult for the finance team to produce all these ad hoc reports at any given time. It's really, the finance committee is vetting things before it gets to the full board. And if that step does not happen, then instead of taking 5 or 10 minutes at each board meeting to go through the finances, it can become a wild, who knows amount of time. It could be 30 minutes, could be an hour. And because if the board members themselves are not well-versed in finance speak, or they feel intimidated and they're just keeping quiet and they're hoping that somebody else understands. So finance committee is playing a very critical role in reviewing the reports, challenging the reports, aligning on what the reports should contain. And then, in some cases, the finance committee leader is saying, we've reviewed the reports. The board treasurer is sharing the numbers with the full board, and that carries a different weight when they say that they're on top of it. We beat this up between the school leader and the finance leader, and that will create a lot of comfort if it's done well. But when there's suboptimal coordination with the board's finance committee, it can really get messy, and again lead to mistrust. And if you have a finance leader who's great at producing the numbers, but not great at communicating the financial story, very often people will base judgment on how well or not they're communicating, and then say, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Hey, look at him. He was looking down at the ground. He wasn't confident in his numbers. And they're looking at all the nonverbal cues and making an assessment instead of what the reports actually say.
Right. And then you've got frustration on both sides of the table. One of the other things I wanted to talk a little bit about from this chapter was schools throwing bodies at problems. So identifying, we have this issue or challenge that we keep running into, let's just assign someone to go tackle it or to handle that process manually, instead of taking a step back and looking at it from a systematic approach to driving efficiencies. Primarily, you talk about through adoption of technology and how that could save, hundreds of hours of manual human time. I'm curious, from your perspective, why are schools so slow to adopt technology? And you can answer that broadly or within the context of finance. I mean, I think the classic knock on the public sector is slowness to adopt innovation and some of the efficiencies that are figured out in the private sector. Why do you think that happens so frequently?
It's really frustrates me because there's, sometimes in some cases the students are, more tech savvy than than the adults give them credit for, and they're lagging and they need to adopt this. And there's so many different software packages that will help automate the school meal counts of who ate breakfast, lunch, or snack, whether they're free, reduced, or full price students. Um, if there's tickets that you're selling for the school play, if there's a lot of different ways to automate things. The unfortunate thing is no one software does it all. So you have to be comfortable with having all these separate systems, some of which won't talk to each other. And any software company that says that it does it all, it doesn't. So there are some frustrations that are legitimate, but they have to, otherwise, if you're spending $50, $60, $70,000 on a full-time person, you're willing to spend that plus all the benefits costs instead of saying, let's try out this technology that'll be, $1,000 a month. Like, it doesn't make sense to me, but there has to be some investment in a subject matter expert who will roll out all these technologies and be ideally a point person to handle all these things. Because otherwise, if you just throw it on top of the finance team or the operations team with their million other duties, then it's going to fail right from the start because you didn't invest the right amount of time and energy. And then they blame the software instead of who was supposed to be accountable and responsible for implementing that software or app or something.
How is investing in technology and building automated systems ultimately an investment in your people? Because I think there are some people who are a little bit concerned that, technology is going to get rid of all these jobs. Probably the best example right now is all of the hype about AI in education and how things can be automated and be done in, a fraction of the time. You sort of make the argument that in this chapter that actually this is a way to honor your staff and you're ultimately investing in a happy, stable, fulfilled workforce. Can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah. You're actually preventing them from burning out. And that's a human thing to do. And if you're investing in them, then they will stay for the long haul instead of, just sink in another 5 hours each day. Like, no, that's just not possible. So everybody, especially since the pandemic, been just working so hard. And we all have to get better at stop. We have to reduce all the self-inflicted wounds, right? Like, we're doing by not implementing technology, you're burning out your staff. So you're going to pay for it one way or another. Because when a staff member leaves, all that institutional knowledge is gone. Then someone has to learn. You have to attract the right person to fill in that gap. Someone's filling that gap in the meantime. So, and not everybody stays forever, right? It's not like the boomer generation where they had one job for 35 years until they retired or something. But you can slow the process of someone jumping because they think the grass is greener at another school or network. But that investment is just so important to prevent the burnout.
And as you're saying here, people don't stay at the same job for 40 years as often anymore. And you are able, through systems and efficiencies and lack of burnout, prolong the time that they're compounding their investment in your organization. But inevitably, transitions happen. People find new career opportunities. What does excellence in succession planning look like from your point of view, particularly as it relates to the finance team? Let's say a longtime CFO retires or departs from an organization. What are some considerations for schools in thinking about succession planning?
Yeah, so there should be at all times, it's a silly example, but any Broadway show has an understudy, right? If the lead character or any other main characters have an illness or a family emergency or something like that, you need to have that understudy. It can't be let's only let the finance leader schedule their vacation around payroll because no other person can handle payroll. There has to be some understudy at all given times for every single role. So, the I hate saying that you get hit by a bus. It's such an awful visual, but if they win the lotto or something like that, you need that understudy to be ready. And it's part of the grooming process. And because then it's like, oh, someone's investing in my future. So at minimum, it would be, it's just like having a relationship with a substitute teaching company. Someone called out, you need someone to fill in, let's call that company and they can fill in for the day. And you have the lesson plans ready and all that kind of stuff. So it's the same thing. If our CFO is retiring, have they groomed the controller to eventually become the CFO? Do we want to work with an outsourced firm or consultant? Whatever that looks like, there has to be a backup plan because the show must go on. The payroll has to get done. The audit has to get completed with your audit firm. The authorizer needs their quarterly reports. The budget has to get, finalized for the next fiscal year. Nothing stops. So you have to have that understudy at the ready, groomed, not, they're leaving in 2 weeks. Now, quick, let's do the brain dump and try to pick up as much as you can. Like that's not fair. So it has to be a very responsible way to go about it. That's laid out over time, not just the last minute. Try to absorb as much as you can.
All right. Awesome stuff there. Well, Raj, thanks so much for coming on. There you have it, folks. That's 3 of the 10 cures in the new book, Fiscally Secure, Prepare, Protect, and Propel Your Charter School with Responsible Financial Management. The book is out now. I know it's on Amazon. Raj, where else would you like to send people if they're curious to learn more about the book or maybe curious to connect with you or learn more about charter school business management?
Yeah, so the book is available on Amazon, the Kindle version, the paperback, the hardcover. I'm still working on the Audible version, but that'll happen sometime in the next few months. And csbm.com is our website. They can email me at first initial, last name, rthakkar@csbm.com. I'm happy to talk with anybody. And really, I just don't want financial mismanagement to be the reason for the school's demise. I just, if the school is to shut down, let it be because of the academics, not because they didn't know their debits from their credits. So.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign-up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@buyq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.